We are already through the first quarter of the Texas Longhorns regular season, and so we're going to grade each unit on the football team through the first three games.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Once again, through the first two segments, grading every unit on this football team through the first quarter or first three games of the regular season. And then in the last segment, big SEC predictions. I put big in air quotes because there's only really one big game, which is Tennessee and Oklahoma. But there's 4 all SEC matchups this weekend. And so I'll give my prediction slash, lightweight, fake analysis on the games and who I think will win this weekend in the 4 SEC matchups. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the perfect way to look, at the regular season to me, and I'm sure, most football coaches preach this, is, when you have 12 games, right? There's 4 quarters of the season. Each 3 games is its own quarter, right? And I'm sure that you like to, self-assess and improve after every game, but you can break the season down into 4 quarters and say after the first quarter, this is what this Texas football team was. After the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, so on and so forth. And so you have the perfect opportunity to do that in college football with there being 12 games, right? You used to be able to do it in the NFL in the 16-game regular season. You could say after the first 4 games, then the second 4 games, and the third 4 games. Now that there's 17 games total, it gets a little wonky at the end, right? You got to do 4, 4, 4, and then 5. But nonetheless, you can still break it into 4 quarters. And I know this is a good way for, people to kind of assess the team, right? And especially for Texas, because we've seen a lot of teams in the first 3 weeks play just cupcakes. So you don't necessarily know what type of football team you have or how they're going to respond when they play against teams on their level. Like you take a team like Ole Miss, for example, who's played Furman, Middle Tennessee State, and Wake Forest. Ole Miss is way better than those teams, right? So we really don't know. We expect that, Ole Miss is going to be really good, but we have to wait and see what's going to happen when they get into SEC play because they've played 3 teams they're just absolutely way better than, right? Whereas Texas, even though they've played Colorado State and UTSA, 2 teams that they obviously would wipe the floor with, they also played a ranked Michigan team on the road, right? Which was a very tough challenge and showed us that this Texas team isn't just beating up on teams that aren't on their level. This is a really good football team, period, right? So like I said, you can always look at the regular season in college football in quarters, and that's what we're going to do after the first 3 games. We are grading each unit on this football team through the first quarter, and then, of course, after the second quarter, third quarter, and then fourth quarter going into the playoffs as well. So starting with the obvious, most obvious position, most important position on the field, quarterback. I went with the A, right? And I'll explain why I didn't go A+, but I went with the A. Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning have been absolutely phenomenal through the first 3 games of the season. We talked all offseason about how we had the best quarterback room in college football. You're certainly seeing it on display right now. Quinn Ewers, 692 total yards and 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions through the first 3 games, completion percentage of 73%, and those numbers would be a lot higher if he didn't get hurt against UTSA. But now Arch Manning's numbers are higher than they probably normally would be because he got that extended time against UTSA with Quinn Ewers going down 371 total yards and 7 touchdowns, I believe on only 18 passing attempts. Of course, some of those are rushing yards as well, completing 78% of his passes, and of course had that electric 67-yard touchdown run. So like I said, our quarterbacks have been absolutely phenomenal. I'm giving them an A. The reason I didn't go with an A+ is the 2 bad turnovers by Quinn Ewers, right? He had the first turnover against Colorado State, spent too much time in the pocket, lost awareness, got the ball tipped, and then it was intercepted against Colorado State. No harm, no foul. We won that game 52-0. Then in the UTSA game, now I was at the game, right? So I'm hearing that, he was fidgeting with his thumb, and they were saying on the broadcast that he had some thumb issues, but it was just a bad pass that he overthrew the running back and it was intercepted, right? And, if his thumb was hurt, then it's hard to believe that he went 16 for 18 on the day for 185 yards, right? So if he was able to complete 16 passes, then he probably should have made that pass as well. So whether his thumb was hurting or not, it was a bad interception. His feet was flat. He wasn't set. and he just made a bad play, right? And so those two interceptions were both bad, and that's the reason I'm gonna give the quarterback room an A instead of an A plus. But nonetheless, both of our quarterbacks have been absolutely phenomenal. You can't ask for more or can't ask for much more than what Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning have done up until this point. Running back, I went with B. The reason I went with B is overall the run game has been great, right? Texas is averaging over 170 yards per game thus far, 520 rushing yards through 3 games, I believe. But the running back room can be a lot more productive. When you look at it, Jaden Blue didn't play against UTSA, but only averaging 4 yards a carry or 4.0, like 4 yards a carry on the dot through the first 2 games, right? We expect more from Jaden Blue, right? With as explosive as he is, only averaging 4 yards a carry on the dot. Trey Wisner, right? He stepped into a bigger role, and I think he's been pretty good, but the numbers say, he's only averaging 3.8 yards a carry. Numbers don't lie. Now, Jarrett Gibson has been our best running back thus far, played in all 3 games. Our leading rusher averaging 5.4 yards per carry, especially for a true freshman, which is really good and what you would probably expect, to see from a running back like Jaden Blue. And then you would expect, Trey Wisner, especially with this offensive line, to be over 4 yards a carry. But obviously, it's just the first quarter. They got plenty of time to, get going and really get that run game to the level that Steve Sarkisian wants it to be. I said this earlier in the week, but on 86 running back carries, only 2 20-yard runs from our running backs thus far, and our 3 longest carries of the season, Ryan Wingo, Arch Manning, and Isaiah Bond, right? So the running game has been, pretty solid overall, but our running backs can be a lot better outside of Jarrett Gibson. Looking forward to the, seeing the improvement over the course of the season. Over the first 3 games, they've been all right. We expect better with this offensive line and the run game at the University of Texas under Steve Sarkisian. Wide receiver, I went with A plus, right? I think our wide receiver room has been exceptional, and all of our guys have had key moments. We came into the season and said that we have 6 guys, legitimately 6 guys that could play in the rotation. I think all 6 guys have left their mark in 1 game, 2 games, some of them all 3 games. But I think all 6 guys have left their mark at some point early on in the first quarter of the season. Isaiah Bond, I think he's been great in all 3 games, had a touchdown and 61 yards in the first game. Those crucial catches on the first drive against Michigan, even though we didn't utilize our wide receivers a ton in that game. And then obviously over 100 yards just breaking out, in this last game against UTSA. He was absolutely phenomenal. Matthew Golden has just been solid and consistent through the first 3 weeks, 2 touchdowns in the first game from Quinn Ewers. Ryan Wingo, I mean, how about this to start your first, 3 games of your career? Lead the team in receiving the first game with 70 receiving yards, come back against Michigan with 55 rushing yards to lead the team in rushing, and then come back against UTSA with a 75-yard touchdown pass from Arch Manning and lead the team in receiving in that game, right? So Ryan Wingo has been absolutely phenomenal. His first 3 games does not look like a true freshman at all. Jonte Cook, right, who we expected to be a bigger part of the rotation, had a nice, I wouldn't say breakout game, but had a really nice game against UTSA with the 2 touchdowns. Glad he got his moment, even though it was called back. DeAndre Moore had a touchdown against Michigan that was called back on a questionable holding call or a holding call that, could have gone either way. But, DeAndre Moore did what he was supposed to do, got downfield, got open, and, caught the touchdown. Unfortunately, like I said, it just got called back because of a holding, call on Cam Williams. And then, Silas Bolden, even though he hasn't been as much a part of the rotation as we expected him to be, he did have that electric touchdown on Arch Manning's, first touchdown of his career, where he kind of manipulated the pocket and then flipped it to Silas Bolden. So all 6 wide receivers that we said could come in and make a huge impact on this team have made an impact one way or another in the first 3 games. Moving on to the tight end room, and it's really just been, Gunnar Helm. Only 2 catches outside of Gunnar Helm in a tight end room, 1 for Amari Niblack and 1 for Juan Davis. But I think Gunnar Helm has exceeded expectations, right? Especially for me, I think he's exceeded expectations. A lot of people wondered how he would come in and look in the absence of Jatavian Sanders, right? And he has 10 catches for 189 yards and a touchdown already in the first 3 games, on pace to surpass JT Sanders' numbers from last year that JT Sanders put up in 13 games, right? Gunnar Helm is on pace to match or exceed what JT Sanders did in 13 games last year in just 12 games in the regular season. And you expect Texas to be in the conference championship game, hopefully, and then play a couple playoff games. So Gunnar Helm unless he just completely falls off, will have a better season than JT Sanders did last year. After a lot of people questioned if he could match the production of JT Sanders, he's been better, at least through the first 3 games. So Gunnar Helm has exceeded my expectations. I'm giving the tight end room an A+ because Gunnar Helm has been absolutely exceptional, even with only 2 catches in the room outside of Gunnar Helm thus far. Then I'm going to give the offensive line an A-, right? The blocking has been exceptional. Probably could be more consistent in terms of opening up holes for our running backs, especially, since we're missing a Bijan or a Jonathan Brooks or a Roshan, guys like that, maybe even a Cedric Baxter that can just make things happen themselves, right? Our offensive line is going to be more responsible for opening up these holes for our running back. And so they probably could be better, in terms of the running game. But I think overall, especially when you go into a tough environment like that, with Michigan with a defensive line like that, our offensive line has been really good. I went with the A- because of the penalties, right? 7 offensive line penalties through the first 3 games. That's absolutely unacceptable, right? And these penalties affect drives when you're moving back 5 yards, moving back 10 yards, right? Calling back big plays that could affect you in some of the bigger games of the season. So this offensive line is going to have to shore up those penalties, but the blocking has been really good through the first 3 games. And that's why I went with a A- for this offensive line. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the defensive side of the ball, grading those units and how they've done through the first 3 weeks of the season. Spoiler alert, they've been really good. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Return on You. Hey, Longhorn fans, have you heard about ROY? It stands for Return on You, and it's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. As you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. Return on You changes the NIL game for fans. You can directly support the players. Return on You allows fans to directly back their favorite college athletes. With ROY, fans can play a key role in shaping the future of their favorite teams while athletes maximize their name, image, and likeness potential. No risk contributions. Fans' contributions are securely held and are only distributed if the athlete makes the decision that aligns with the fan support. If not, the money is returned to the fan, and you can engage with athletes on their NIL journey. By using Return on You, fans not only support athletes financially, but also become part of their name, image, and likeness journey, helping them succeed both on and off the field. So download Return on You for iOS or Android and enter the referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered in a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Support the players and change the game with ROY or Return on You. Today's episode also brought to you by Gametime. The best ticketing app in the industry. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I just got 2 tickets for the Rangers game on Friday night to see Jacob deGrom pitch. Section 102, row 3, $46 total for 2 tickets. If I'm lying, I'm flying. Right? Priority Gametime Picks creation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. If mentioning all-in pricing must include that you have to turn on this feature. Seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. I probably shouldn't have told y'all exactly where I'm going to be sitting, at the Rangers game on Friday night. But I mean, hey, if you happen to be at the Rangers game on Friday night, you now know where I'm going to be sitting. Come holler at me, right? And I guess that was just the best way to, tell you how good Gametime is, right? Like, section 102, row 3, $46 for 2 seats after taxes and fees to see Jacob deGrom pitch. Like, is there a better Gametime pitch than that? I mean, come on now. That's elite. Hey, that's why I get a little excited when I read that ad read, because I use Gametime and used it a lot. All right, so looking at the defensive side of the ball, Defense has been really good, but just going to grade each unit and go through each unit, on this football team on the defensive side of the ball. Starting with the edge rushers, I give the edge rushers a B plus, right? The edge rushers have been able to get good pressure on the quarterbacks from what I've seen, especially in the UTSA game and in the Colorado State game. Towards the end, Davis Warren got some, garbage time, passing yards and was able to make some plays down the field. But for the most part, I think our edge rushers have got really good pressure on the quarterbacks through 3 games. But Colin Simmons really is the only edge rusher that has really made splash plays, right? And so you expect to see more splash plays from your edge rushers, especially what we brought in and what we brought back in that room. And at least through the first quarter, we haven't seen a ton of that thus far. Colin Simmons, the true freshman phenom out of Duncanville, has 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss thus far out of that edge room. The rest of the edge room right now has produced 0 sacks and 4.5 tackles for loss. So Colin Simmons has 2 sacks. The rest of them have 0. And then in terms of tackles for loss, he's essentially produced what the entire rest of the room has, right? And so, like I said, if I told you Trey Moore didn't have any sacks through the first 3 weeks, Barron Sorrell didn't have any sacks through the first 3 weeks, Ethan Burke didn't have any sacks through the first 3 weeks, you would look at me crazy. But that's the reality at this point. We need to see more splash plays from our edge rushers. Now, Ethan Burke did have the pick 6, right? But he was just in the right place at the right time. When somebody throws it off the back of their receiver or the back of their offensive lineman and it bounces right into your hands, you were able to run it to the end zone. Obviously, a great play by him, but we don't pay our edge rushers to get pick 6s. We pay our edge rushers to get sacks and NIL money, of course, right? And we haven't seen a ton of that outside of Colin Simmons thus far. So just the first quarter, but I expect that to pick up. Hopefully, it needs to as the schedule gets tougher moving into SEC play. Defensive tackles, I give them a B, right? And I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm just an expert on trench play and I'm watching them every play. And obviously, defensive tackles, a lot of their job is to open up opportunities for other people, right? And so they could just be absolutely moving people at the line of scrimmage, and then Anthony Hill or David Benda or, one of the edge rushers is getting the tackle and getting credit for it, right? But when you're replacing Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, who played in this same scheme and were very disruptive and making those splash plays week in and week out, then we have to judge Alfred Collins, a Vernon Broughton, a Tia Savea, and those boys the same way, right? In 3 games, the only stat credited outside of tackles, of course, but the only splash play that's been credited to the defensive tackle room is 1 tackle for loss from Tia Savea in the UTSA game, right? So, through 3 games, right? Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, Tia Savea, Bill Norton, Jermaine Lole, Sadir Mitchell, all of them, right? The only splash play they've registered is 1 tackle for loss from Tia Savea. So I give them a B. The defense has still been pretty good, even though we've allowed, some, more rushing yards than we probably should have. But, like I said, we watched Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy get those splash plays week in and week out. I would expect a little bit more from our defensive tackle room moving forward as the schedule gets tougher. But still give them a B. Defense has been really solid. Linebackers, A+. I'm giving the linebackers an A+ through the first 3 games, the first quarter of the season. I think our linebacker crew has been exceptional in all 3 games. When you look at the stats, Anthony Hill, 22 tackles, 1 sack, and 2.5 tackles for loss through 3 games. David Benda, 16 tackles, 2 tackles for loss through the first 3 games. And then Ty Anthony Smith, who made his debut in the UTSA game. That's the only game he played in. 4 tackles and a tackle for loss. They've been coming downhill, making plays in the run game, moving side to side, making plays in the run game. And they've been great in coverage as well, right? We have not seen teams, even though we haven't played, any just elite passing offenses yet, we have not seen teams take advantage of our linebackers in pass coverage as we've seen in the past. So I think our linebackers have been exceptional. Anthony Hill, David Benda, Ty Anthony Smith. That's not even to mention Leonga Lafau, who has a sack. He's played really well. And then, game speed, Mo Blackwell, who always, hits hard and brings the energy. So our linebacker room has been exceptional, giving them an A+ through the first quarter of the season. Our corners, I'm giving them an A+ as well, right? Jade Barron, Malik Muhammad, Gavin Holmes, and Jalen Gilbo have been as good as you can ask for so far this season. Texas is only allowing 4.7 yards per attempt, which is 12th in the nation right now. So our corners have been absolutely elite. Like I said, we haven't played, just the best passing offenses in the nation, but they've gone out there and dominated who's been in front of them, right? And so proud of our corners. This pass defense was, at times very bad last season. Our corners have stepped up to the plate, at least through the first quarter, first 3 weeks of the season. Like I said, 4.7 yards per attempt. That is just phenomenal, right? Our corners, I'm giving them A+. And then safety is the same thing, for the same reason. They're a big part of that pass defense as well. Much maligned last year. Michael Taff, he's just a football player and a leader, right? What he's brought to this defense is absolutely exceptional. Derek Williams, right? He came on as a true freshman and he was great, but he's continued that in his second season. And then Andrew Makuba, what a performance against Michigan, right? But he's been good against UTSA and Colorado State as well, but had that breakout performance against Michigan in a Texas uniform. So our safeties have been absolutely exceptional in the passing game, coming down, into the box, making plays in the running game. They're a huge part of why our defenses look so good through the first 3 weeks of the season. Safeties, corners, and linebackers all get an A+ from me. So whether I give, a unit a B, a B+, a A-, a A, what we do know is this Texas football team is elite, arguably the best team in the country right now, especially the way that, Georgia just struggled with this Kentucky team, this past Saturday. And yeah, like Joel Klatt said, I'm going to keep going back to it in the Michigan game. If you want to win the national championship in 2024, you're going to have to go through the Texas Longhorns. A quick word from our sponsors, and then I'll talk about some of the big games or lack thereof in the SEC this weekend. Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and then Arkansas and Auburn, all SEC matchups this weekend, where it just means more, right? Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so talking about the biggest game of the college football weekend, Tennessee travels to Norman, Oklahoma to face off against the Oklahoma Sooners. Both teams 3-0 going into this matchup. So it's going to be a really exciting game. All eyes are going to be on this game this weekend. When you look at it, Tennessee is favored by either 6 or 7 points going on the road into Norman, which is unusual, right, for the Oklahoma program we're used to seeing. But this isn't the Oklahoma program we're used to seeing under Brent Venables. The defense has been really good. They did allow 19 points to Tulane, 12 points, and 260 passing yards to Donovan Smith from U of H. But, nonetheless, the defense has made plays, timely plays, and they've been really good. It's the offense that's been very questionable for the Oklahoma Sooners when you look at it, right? Jackson Arnold has yet to throw for 200 passing yards in a game this season. They have no running back going over 150 yards this season, and only one wide receiver, Deion Burks, has gone over 100 yards. So this offense has just struggled. We've seen what happens when you try to come into the SEC or you just try to play period, having to replace your top 6 offensive linemen. And I'm just not of the belief that Oklahoma can just all of a sudden figure it out, taking a step up, in competition, right? When you're playing teams like Temple, U of H, and who did they just play? Tulane. Obviously, Tennessee is a huge step up from that, right? So if you aren't able to, have a good showing offensively against those teams, now you're going against a Tennessee team that's only given up 13 points on the entire season and has scored over 50 points in each game, right? Now, I do think that this Oklahoma defense can step up and, kind of stifle this Tennessee offense a little bit. But I just think eventually, right, especially when your offense is continuing to go 3 and out, that Tennessee defense is really good. I think they're going to shut down the Oklahoma offense. One, just because they haven't been good all year. So like I said, to think that they would magically figure it out this week is just kind of, that's a little crazy to think, right? And so I think Nico Amaleva, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but, yeah, he's really good, right? Y'all know who I'm talking about. I think they, make some plays. They put some points on the board. I think, Oklahoma's going to try to shorten the game and run the ball, but eventually they're going to find themselves down, 2 scores. They're going to have to throw the ball, and I just don't think Jackson Arnold can win a matchup, outgunning, Nico Yamaleva, however you say his last name. So the spread is about 6 to 7 points. I do think Tennessee wins by 10+ points at Oklahoma this weekend. Florida and Mississippi State. Look, we know Billy Napier is a dead man walking, right? It's only a matter of time before he gets fired. But at some point, Florida has to play inspired football, right? You thought it would come against Miami. It didn't. You thought it would come against Texas A&M. It didn't. But you're looking at a Mississippi State team that just lost to Toledo by 3 scores, right? as bad as a SEC program is and in transition, that should never happen where a SEC team is losing to Toledo by 3 scores. So that Mississippi State team is just as bad as Florida, right? But at least Florida still has the athletes. They're just not playing inspired football under Billy Napier. Look, if Florida loses this game, then obviously Billy Napier will not be the coach of the Florida Gators on Monday. But I do think they find a way to play inspired football, favored by a touchdown on the road against Mississippi State. I do think they go in there and win that game. Maybe not by a touchdown, but I think Mississippi State is just in way worse shape right now than the Florida Gators. And the Florida Gators are in pretty bad shape. Arkansas and Auburn don't really have much to say about either one of these teams. Two teams that desperately need a win. Sam Pittman certainly on the hot seat, and Auburn, they had a bad loss to Cal, right? And so they have to turn things around and get a win in this game. I said on the SEC preview that, former Texas quarterback turned Utah running back, turned Arkansas running back, Jaquindon Jackson goes off in this game. And I think Arkansas gets a win on the road in a game that, once again, Arkansas needs because they blew that 14-point lead to Oklahoma State, and Auburn needs because they lost to Cal. But I think Arkansas gets the win. They're able to run the ball. I think they have more playmakers on the offensive side of the ball than Auburn. And then the last matchup, Vanderbilt going to Missouri. Vanderbilt looked good against Florida State. I mean, excuse me, not Florida State, but they probably could beat Florida State the way they look right now. Virginia Tech. I don't know why I said Florida State. And then they won their second game convincingly, but went back to full Vandy mode and lost to Georgia Tech, right? I mean, not Georgia Tech. I'm off. Georgia, it was either state. I think it was Georgia State or Georgia Southern. I got to look it up. Either way, they lost that game, right, in true Vandy fashion, right, losing to teams that even Vanderbilt should beat, right? And then you look at it, Missouri, top 7 team in the country. I'm not sure if they're one of the 7 best teams in the country, but at least, through the first 3 games, they've looked that way. I think Missouri is favored by 20-plus points against, or favored by like 20 on the dot against Vanderbilt. And yeah, I think the Vanderbilt, Cinderella ride is over after beating Virginia Tech in overtime in the first game of the season. I think Missouri, especially with that wide receiver core and that offense, they come out and beat Vanderbilt by 20-plus points. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.